Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and we are Bored of It. And today we're going to be reviewing both Cascadero and Cascadito. And these are two new games by Reiner Knizia, with Cascadero being the classic tabletop version of the game and Cascadito being the roll and write version of it. Cascadero is for 2 to 4 players, but Cascadito is for 1 to 4 players.
Yeah, so we were provided, just to note, both of these games as review copies by the publisher, by Wing Games. And essentially, they work together with Reiner Knizia to bring some new Reiner Knizia games, which is always exciting. And we just thought, because they are similar, and obviously we do a lot of buyer's guides, just to do a kind of mini comparison review where we compare and contrast both of them. So let's get into how they play. In Cascadero, your turn is very simple. All you do is place an envoy on a non-town space on the board. And then what you're trying to do is connect towns together, because when you connect to a town with a group of envoys, defined as 2 or more envoys, then you will move up on the respective coloured track matching that town. And by moving up these tracks, you're going to get points and bonus actions and bonuses, and otherwise create little combos that allow you to do much more in a single turn than just place a single envoy. There are some considerations in that a single horse on its own next to a town doesn't do anything, and you also cannot, to kind of score a town and move up on a track, you can't place an envoy next to a town if the group you're extending is already touching that town. That doesn't do anything. It has to be a fresh connection, if you will. But the other considerations are who's already at that town. If you're the first player to connect a group of envoys to that town, you'll go up 1 on the track. If you're the second, third, fourth, fifth, doesn't matter, player, you'll go up 2 spaces, as long as you're not the first. And it doesn't even matter if you were the first, the second time you connect to that town, you'll still get to go up 2 spaces, as long as it's a separate group. Then, if you have one of these white non-player pieces at that town you're connecting to, you will go up a bonus space on the track. So a total of 2 or 3, depending on the condition in which you initially connected to the town, e.g. if you're first or if you're second or third. And that is basically it. And the main thing you're trying to do is to go up these tracks and get a lot of points and combo together, so you can do much more than placing a single envoy in a turn. And you're also competing over a number of achievements. Some everyone can do, like connecting multiple towns of the same color with one group of envoys, and you get some points. Others are the first player to do it will get all the points and lock it out for other players, such as gaining 3 of these tokens, or being the first to the top of a colored track. But what the real twist is that, as usual, the player who has the most points will win at the end of the game. But to be in contention to even win the game, you have to max out the track that matches your player color. So that's a very important consideration, because it could be that you could be last in points, but if you're the only player who's maxed out their track, you win. And the game will end either when a player gets 50 or more points, or when a player has no more envoys to place when it comes to their turn.
Just to start off with some things that we really like about Cascadero, it is quite light on rules, but it is very big on strategy, which I think is pretty typical of Reiner Knizia games. When you hear the rules, it sounds pretty simple. You're just kind of putting some cubes down on a board, but as you start to play, the strategies really start revealing themselves. And we have a bit of a soft spot for games of this nature where, yeah, you're just shifting some cubes around on a board, but by the end, everyone's sitting there like, oh my God, what do I do next? And really, really having to think about their next move. So this is pretty typical of that. Something else which is really nice is that it's in a very nice thin box, which we really appreciate. We are running out of space in our apartment for more board games, so anywhere a game can save a little bit of space is a big thumbs up from us. It's very nice and neat and very aesthetic too.
There are a lot of really nice design touches that we very much enjoy in Cascadero. So one thing that I'm a particular fan of is the fact that you can end up having these quite big combo-y turns from the act of placing a single envoy on the board. And it just comes across as really satisfying when you spin out another turn and maybe another turn and some bonuses and you move up some tracks. It's just very fulfilling. Then there are also some other elements like the seals, which have a very interesting addition to gameplay. So, for example, the seals, there's an achievement where you need to have 3 of them, and then you get some points and you block off other players from being able to get that. But that also means that you're not spending them. So there's kind of like this hoard. Do you hoard them or do you use them for your benefit? Because once you use them, they're gone. And that's quite an interesting decision. But the seals are also interesting in themselves because they basically make a single horse or envoy become a group. So you can place it on the board and it instantly connects to a town. With no need to kind of pre-work on creating that group, which can be really beneficial in particularly tense times or when you're competing over certain things. I think that's also something that we both really enjoyed. The fact that for what's in many ways the feel of a kind of old school classic Euro game, there's a lot of points of player interaction, particularly the achievements, where players are racing to get them and they're fighting over them, and it puts a fair amount of tension into the game. And there's also a lot of interesting decisions that come into that where you know what you want to do, but then maybe doing this thing would negatively affect your opponent. So should you do that and hamper them a little bit or get in their way, or should you continue with your own path? And these are all things that we find very enjoyable about Cascadero.
Coming on to how the game feels at different player counts, we personally like to play this game with just the 2 of us, but it does feel a little bit different because you do have to kind of build your strategy a little bit more for yourself and work on your own thing, at least in the beginning, because of course there's less other players to bounce off. So it's more about being efficient with where you place your pieces to be able to move up the tracks. Whereas of course with 3 and 4 players, you can almost instantly get into thinking about how you can use their movements for your own benefit. Of course, the game is a little bit meaner as well with more players because space is at a premium and everyone will be fighting a little bit more over the kind of spaces where they need to go. And there's also a lot more options to be meaner and actively block other players in higher player count games, which is of course less there in a 2-player game because the spaces don't change. But for us, we really like playing at 2. But it does shine a little bit more maybe at the 3 and 4 player count.
Something that was a pleasant surprise was the variability that comes in Cascadero, because there are different starting placements for the heralds, which creates interesting changes to the decision space in how you go about what you're doing. And there's also a variant where when you score them, for lack of a better word, you can move them somewhere else. And that creates quite interesting and interactive decisions within the game because you can do it to move them further away from other players, keep them behind you, and it becomes quite tactical and interesting. Furthermore, there's a second side of the board, which is what's shown here, called the farmer variant, if you will, where there are farmer tiles, which are bonus tiles that you can place your envoys on, and they give you bonuses, so points and maybe bonus actions or let you move up tracks. And obviously this really gives an interesting twist to gameplay and kind of expands the considerations beyond what was in the standard game. So a lot of different ways to play, although the core is very much the same each time, but it's still something for a game like this that is really appreciated. Moving on from that though, I will say that there are 2 things which bring down this package a little bit. The two main complaints we have. So the first would be, and this is always arguable depending on what people are willing to pay, but I would say the price point. And the price point I've seen it for is just that little bit much higher than I would like to see for a game of this weight, a box of this size, and kind of the experience that's on offer. And don't get me wrong, there is such an excellent production, and as I just said about the variability, but that's just my opinion, right? I would just kind of like to see it at that £5 cheaper to make it a really, really good recommendation for purchase. The second, and probably more harmful to Cascadero thing, is one of the issues in any Reiner Knizia design is, would you want to play this, or should I buy this over other more classic and more famous Reiner Knizia designs? And probably not. It's one of these awkward positions where it's a very good game in its own right, but it's not the top tier of games. And from a designer who has so many others that are so good and also in many ways similar, Through the Desert comes to mind, it's also a very hard recommendation to say, get this over anything else. But that's not to say that we're not going to keep it, and I'm looking forward to playing after completing this review. I'm itching to play again, but that's just being honest about the situation at hand. Turning to Cascadito now, the roll and write version of Cascadero. The gameplay, very, very similar, except fueled by dice, of course. So you're still trying to make groups of envoys and connect towns together to mark off, in this case, tracks, which then give you more actions and points. And there are 4 maps, and they get more complex as they go along, add more variables, more considerations, but we'll get to that in a bit. Essentially, though, you're doing the same. You'll roll the dice, and then you'll remove any that have colors currently not in play. So, for example, the first map doesn't have any white towns, and there's also a face that's just black. You'd remove those, and then that gives you your dice pool. And then players in turn order take turns picking 1 die. And then, in this case, you will mark a space on the map adjacent to a town of the color you picked. So if I pick a pink town, I can mark a space next to any pink town. And then once they're all gone, that player will roll, and then it kind of goes again. There's no formal rounds, as there were. It's just when the dice pool empties, the player will roll and you'll just continue. The biggest difference is how the game ends, in terms of you still have achievements, and the achievements are still divided into ones that are about connecting a number of towns of the same color for each color in the game that can be completed by all players. Or there are also still the achievements that can only be completed by 1 player, and then they're blocked for every other player. Now, the end game can come when, as a collective group, all players complete the achievements which can only be done by 1 player. So they're basically they've crossed them all off essentially as a group, then the game will end. Or if 1 player single-handedly completes all of the achievements that are about connecting towns of a certain color together, then the game will also end. And then you'll score up for a number of things, primarily the tracks that you have been moving up, which give you points, but there are also other ways that, again, we'll get into as we describe the different maps.
There are 4 different maps that you can choose from, which add some nice variability, and each one will have some different achievements that you score for. So it's really nice to be able to kind of have some different strategies and different things to aim for every time you use a different map. So map 1 is probably closest to the base game. It's fairly vanilla, quite standard. Map 2 is called Raiding Bandits, and here the towns are closer together, so there's a lot more opportunity for scoring, and there are also spaces which have a bandit icon on them, and the more you cross off, you can mark the matching icons on a track, and more opportunity again to score points the higher you go up that track. Map 3 is called Two Rivers, and there are two rivers going through the middle of the map. And there are also spaces in this map which let you take additional actions, basically. So it's really nice to be able to kind of mark those off and combo up as well and mark off some additional tracks. And then map 4 is called Trade and Defense. This map has star icons on some of the spaces, which again let you do some kind of cascading actions because you get to mark off a space that's adjacent. And it also has some trade goods on there on some of the spaces. And if you mark off 2 matching ones, you'll also score some additional points from doing that. What's quite nice about the different maps is not only is there kind of variety between them, but also even within an individual map, because of the different elements that are thrown in with each one, you kind of get pulled in different directions. You know, do you go for an efficiency puzzle and try to figure out how you can best connect things up for a longer term game? Or do you try to go as fast as possible because in some elements it is a little bit of a race to maybe collect the achievements, for example. So this is also very interesting how you can approach the different maps, even if you play them kind of one after the other, the same map. We also really like the production. Again, this is a very kind of aesthetically pleasing game. And the flip box is also very nice for travel, which we always really appreciate.
Turning now to some of the things that we don't like so much about Cascadito. The first would be that it's a fairly generic roll and write. There's no sharp edges here. There's nothing that makes it distinct or special or particularly interesting. You know, there are both roll and writes which give a similar feel but are much lighter. And then there are roll and writes which have much more depth and give a kind of much more interesting decision space. So that leaves it right in the middle, which isn't a particularly great place to be. Then there are also a few kind of design decisions that I in particular am not a fan of. One thing that's a little bit awkward is there's only 5 colors. So when you roll dice, they have a 6th face that doesn't have anything, it's blank. And I get, you know, how this came to be, but there's something just a little awkward about rolling dice and then taking a bunch out, particularly as also the first map doesn't have any white towns either. So then you have kind of a third of the faces not being used and just thrown out. And it makes things really, I don't quite want to say unbalanced, but awkward in that because you re-roll when you run out of dice to pick from, it doesn't make it even who gets the full selection of dice. It could very well be that a single player always gets to roll and always gets a full selection, whereas the other player always has a little less. Then there is the fact that the game ends based on all players completing certain achievements, or one player completing all of the kind of color town connecting achievements. And as this is a roll and write, very solitary. There's very little interaction besides picking dice. So you generally, unless you're announcing loudly everything you're doing, have absolutely no concept of what the other players are up to, how close to achievements they are, what achievements they're going for. And it's also the kind of game, because you're comboing and have these big turns, where you could leap and get 3 achievements in a single round. So what that leads to is very unsatisfying endings because you have no concept of what the other players are doing. The game can come to a sudden crashing halt. And this is something I particularly dislike, and I've noted it in other games, when you cannot really have any inkling of how close or far you are away from the game ending, because that informs your decisions, because you can obviously make longer term decisions to go for longer term strategies, or you can make short term decisions for quick, easy points. And when the knowledge of how long the game will last is taken away from you, those decisions come a bit meaningless and random, and it's a bit of a luck shoot, essentially. So that's one further thing that really wasn't particularly happy with in Cascadito. Coming to our final thoughts, Cascadero, in particular of the 2 games, was something that we really enjoyed, and we, as I said, look forward to playing again. I think it is a really nice game. I think it's a strong contender, but it's also in the unfortunate situation of being not a top tier Reiner Knizia game. And I think you would have some debate, would you ever play this over Through the Desert? Probably not. And that's a bit unfortunate for it because it is still a very good game that we enjoy. Cascadito, in my opinion, it's not the best roll and write I've played. I don't think there's a lot of sharp edges that would make me recommend it over a number of other roll and writes. And I also think that Cascadero is by far more interesting to play. You do have some nice variety in Cascadito, but as I kind of said in the section where I talked about what we didn't like, I have a fair few bones to pick with it.
Yeah, I'm saying we, but I don't have so much bones to pick with it. I think you get more triggered by the way that it ends than me. It bothers me a lot less than you. I think I've managed to win this one maybe a few more times than you, which is very rare. So that bothers me a lot less. But yeah, agree. I mean, I really like the way that these look on the table. I like the vibe. And again, like I said with Cascadero, we always appreciate games where it's just moving a few little pieces around on a board, but there's really a wide space for strategy, and it really falls into that. So I still think it's a nice game. But yeah, I don't know if it would be like the top of my mind when it was coming to what should we play. I'm not sure I would kind of think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a nice game to introduce to other people there. We played it obviously with friends and think it goes down quite well because it has a simple rule set.
Yeah, exactly. And it also has a quite nice play time for the crunch that you get. Yeah. So I think it's something that's very appealing in that manner because there's very little to set up. It's very quick to explain and you get straight into it.
Yeah.
And then within an hour, you're probably done, right? So I think that does help it a lot, actually. But that was our review of Cascadero and Cascadito. If you have any questions on either, please let us know. We're happy to help. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing. And most importantly, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.